The conversation that we're having today is about AI, which obviously has exploded onto the scene over the past 2 years, but you two probably know better than most that AI in some form has been around for decades, and machine learning in other forms. So I guess to kick off this conversation and really set the scene, is AI just a rebranding of something that has existed and that we've been using for years now?
You want to start, or should I start? You do. All right. I'll start. First, actually, thank you, Bloomberg, Katie, for hosting us. Very much enjoy sharing the stage with you. I guess I would say that it is new, but I would think of it as an evolution of what we've done before, right? So if you go back to the sort of stuff that Todd and I have been doing at Freestone Grove in all of our previous roles, the quantitative process has always been a huge part of it. And so if you go back 20 years, that was early regression stuff. Later, you think about machine learning things. Later, you think about neural networks, sentiment analysis. And so we do think of this as an evolution of that, right? It's not like we're running around thinking, oh, this is like a brand new thing. We don't know what to do with it. But it is a new capability, particularly as it relates with text sort of data, right? And so we're pretty comfortable with it because it's something that we've seen happen in other parts of the business. But it does bring additional capabilities that we wouldn't have had before.
Yeah, I think I very much agree with you in kind of your overall framing. It really depends how narrowly you look at AI, whether you include the kind of broad predictive machine learning in that category. And then it has really been trusted and true for a very long time and component of all types of systematic investment strategies. But I like your nuance around language really being a differentiator, maybe video as well, where the new capabilities do feel more like a kind of slow progression of advancements. It's more of a jump. Not quite sure yet whether get the right direction fully, but machine learning is very comfortable with numbers, and text is used to be unwieldy when it came to seamlessly integrate in the otherwise more numeric world of finance. And I think having gotten over that hurdle really opens up new opportunities, but also challenges that we're still trying to figure out.
Well, to build on that, I'm curious, I mean, in your current roles where you are right now, strategic data science, quantitative investing, how much is AI in any form already a part of your life and your day-to-day?
I think that depends, again, how you feel about the definition. I walked into my first course on artificial intelligence in '95, when it was a really obscure hobby of some computer scientists. And I've always been in love with working with data through technology, so I didn't have to talk to people and you could still learn something about the world. But in that sense, I've always felt a little awkward calling it intelligence. I just loved looking at it as learning from data, and it has been my steady career companion throughout the years. And it is a bit of a quantitative shift, what we're having now, because we can talk to it, and it talks back in a way. That's why it feels different, but it has been my steady partner for a very long time.
Yeah, I guess we'd like to make a distinction between the part of the tooling that is helpful for automation versus the part of the tooling that you think might be helpful for, I'm going to call it making judgments, right? I think one thing that is important to remember is that the current stage of what we think of AI and the transformer-based technology, right? It is trained on millions of documents, tens of millions of documents, and the training is designed to produce essentially a probabilistic forecast for what is the next word or the next sentence, right? You use the word token, right? But it's essentially, in finance, I guess for many of you here in this room, you would think of this as it gives you the consensus, right? Mm-hmm. So if you put a prompt in ChatGPT, what you get back is essentially some average of what a typical person might say, right? Because that's how it's been trained, right? So from our point of view, when you think about alpha generation, you don't make money off of the consensus, right? You make money off of differences. That's kind of the job, right? And a lot of how AI is delivered now is essentially not constructed to do that, right? And so we've been significantly more focused in it helping the investment process with automation, summarization, potentially thinking about understanding themes with a lot of the data that we get now, not as much on the sort of actually making judgments on the investment side. We just don't think it's at that stage at this point.
Well, to that point that AI is trained to give you the consensus, you don't make money off of the consensus unless you're long NVIDIA over the past 18 months. But to that point, where is the most opportunity for AI? Is it for alpha generation, maybe down the line, or is it more from the productivity gains that you could get from using an LLM, for example?
So I really love the notion of thinking about it as predicting consensus. But I would argue that's not that untrue from other predictive models, even linear regression as well, right? And then consensus for who? To your question about alpha, sure, if I just ask an LLM, hey, what do you think, where's the economy in Germany going these days? Yep, I'm going to get a consensus. Yeah. But if you start to be much more nuanced about it and say, okay, considering, I don't know, the recent political upheavals in France and the election results for Europe and, I don't know, the flooding or whatever else you want to consider, right? But then it becomes this augmentation of me working with an AI because I'm putting all the things on the table that it needs to consider. And now it's answering a question that nobody has ever asked, which is a problem too, because this is where they get really good at hallucinations. And this is where governing it really becomes very difficult. So I personally have found it in the systematic space to be really good at injecting text-based information as another form of looking into the world, into an established, very well tested and constrained apparatus that then can make forecasts for alpha. And so sometimes being able to integrate text into that other existing context of what the world in finance is doing already, I think there's a lot of value there. But we're moving slowly, knowing that one needs to be careful around those.
Yeah, I think the thing that is a little bit different in our context is Freestone Grove, the way we founded it, is intended to be an integration of the quantitative side and the fundamental side, right? And so unlike a, quote, pure quantitative firm, we have long history of thinking about how do you deal with the tax data with humans, right? That's what a fundamental analyst does. And so in that context, we're more interested in how do you use that technology as a mechanism to make you more effective in dealing with all that text and data that you read, right? For a fundamental analyst, a huge chunk of the job is literally reading all day, right? There's all your sell-side reports and the conferences and the transcripts and the models. And so insofar as you can get additional productivity from having the tooling help you direct attention, sort of make you more effective in thinking about what it is that you want to spend your time, we find that a useful sort of early use case. We have tended to find that if you want to substitute the actual judgment generation for it, you at least currently don't get particularly good results.
And so, I mean, just to crystallize some of what we're talking about, Claudia, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're saying that, I mean, it is possible to sort of generate alpha, to maybe make money if you really tailor what you're asking the AI, that it depends on what you put into it.
So my example was more about it having, it really matters how you combine it with other information, rather than just asking a somewhat naive question. But again, I'm in the systematic space, so I'm not usually asking ChatGPT about its opinions. And then it becomes really more of a way that I can inject easily analyst reports into something that is already using traditional statistical machine learning, because now it's easy to put the text on the same footing as everything else. But to your point, and I really value that part, I stumbled into finance about 5 years ago. My background's in computer science. And so I like having ChatGPT being a comrade in arms to understand some financial nuances. So it's almost like my personal tutor, or when I want to understand what does the analyst actually mean when he talks this way about a company, to help my ideation as I'm thinking about what kind of data to include for differentiated models that can have a competitive edge.
Well, how reliable is AI? And I like that framing, that it's a comrade in arms. You can use it as a tutor. You can ask questions of, LLMs such as ChatGPT. But can you really trust what it's spitting out at this point, or do you have to go through, clean it, fact-check it before you actually use it for something?
So I think there is the systematic answer to that. How do you backtest something for the last, 7 years, which is standard, when it only has been around for, 2.5-ish? So we do not trust it per se. And we are working very hard on figuring out how to think about backtesting. But it depends on the question. If all I need it to tell me what the zip code of an address was, which used to be a huge problem, but now I can easily pull those out, merge it on that with other data, I'm not that worried about it getting zip codes wrong. It's just really good at that stuff. So I think that's the nuance. Are you asking a common question that it probably knows how to handle well, or are you hunting that unicorn where I really wouldn't trust it whatsoever?
Well, I'll turn that question to you. Do you trust AI at this point?
Yeah, same answer. It depends on the application, right? I think in general, you could do pretty good testing on things that essentially boil down to automation, where it's less about whether you trust it or not. It's just that you have the tools to do the testing, right? And so you're looking to automate some particular model on the back end, back office stuff. I'm going to call it mundane sorts of things. I don't have to trust it. I can just test it, right? Once you're thinking about an application that is either sort of a tool as part of the actual investment process on the judgment side of things, it's not even obvious what exactly you want to test in many cases. I sometimes use this example of thinking about where insight comes from in the first place, right? So if you think about what a good fundamental analyst does or did, for many years, not just now, that reading of all the documentation, looking at the text, understanding what the market looks like, economic conditions, what subtle thing is the person picking up that then leads to an idea that becomes a differentiated bet? It's not obvious how exactly that happens, right? And so it's hard to then ask the question, is this machine reproducing that process, right? So I sometimes use the example of taking notes. It's been now a while as one of the early use cases of AI where you could take a transcript of every meeting you have, you can have ChatGPT summarize it, and yet most people don't do this because most people have figured out that if you do that, you kind of give up your ability to actually learn from what's happening. Most people take notes mostly as a mechanism to better remember what was happening, to sort of prompt themselves for new insight. And if you suddenly kill that, it's not obvious where exactly the insight is coming from, right? And so part of our problem is that what question to ask about, is this thing actually reproducing my insight, is actually a hard question to ask in the first place, right? And so we're not, I don't think we're anywhere near there.
And I think that the conversation that we're having right now ties really nicely into the actual name of this conversation, which is the right mix of humans and machines. So I'll ask you just straight that. I mean, what do you think the right mix right now is when it comes to using AI versus having that discretion over what you're using, and where do you think that could go?
To not give another kind of, it depends on the application kind of answer.
In your application, how you use it.
I find it augmentative to my mind and actually help me understand processes by just having a partner to talk to in some ways. But that's probably not where most people who are sitting in this audience kind of come from. I do value it as a tool to automate some kind of trusted, easy processes that I know how to control. I like it to amplify or scale myself when there's a kind of, the amusing word in computer science circles is AI allows professors to code again. Because if you don't every day have 4 hours to really deep dive into code, it's something that gets rusty. And I found some of the coding capabilities to be useful, to just give myself the opportunity to do something that I miss doing in the kind of higher roles that I've taken. So in those terms, and then as a technical tool, I love seeing how algorithms evolve in finding signals that I haven't been able earlier to detect, with the caveat that we are still working very hard on gaining the confidence to do so. Maybe you asked me about how to use it.
Yeah.
Let's for a moment not talk about finance. I love the example that computer scientists have been working for ages making AI look at images of fMRI to detect cancer. Turns out doctors don't care about AI taking over the one fun part of the job, because that's what they're actually good at and like to do, looking at images, coming up with diagnosis. What they don't like to do is write reports about this after. So by reframing the application to one that addresses something that we find somewhat tedious and maybe not as good at, and focusing on those. So I think the human component is very often about framing the problem. Even in finance, you can look at companies many different ways. How you deploy your AI, how you frame the problem in the first place. This is where our intuition and really value comes in.
And it's a nice reminder, too, that we're taking this through the narrow lens of finance, but you think about the totality of the potential of AI, and it has much broader applications. But to re-zoom in and bring that question to you, I mean, very curious to hear your thoughts as to what the right mix is when it comes to your role.
Claudia didn't want to do the it depends, so I will do the it depends. I think it depends a lot. We actually had this conversation prior to this on the coding side, right? So even for a particular potential application, in this case coding, I think there's a very big difference between, hey, I'm a little rusty, I'm not as hands-on anymore, the tool will help me, most definitely, right? If you ask engineers who are doing code all day, every day, we've actually done a bunch of experimentation on this, what you find is that the tools will generate a bunch of code, and then they find themselves spending just as much time double-checking the code, such that, in fact, there is no benefit, right? At least on a timing sense. And so even on a narrow case, it very much depends on, okay, code for whom? You know, a researcher who occasionally does code, or code for an engineer that is doing that all day, every day. Mm-hmm. And I suspect that that will repeat itself in lots of places where high expertise roles will take much longer for that to sort of replace itself with components of you know, whatever the next generation of AI looks like. In lower expertise roles where AI can do something that you sort of do on the side or is not the main focus, writing reports as a doctor, I suspect that will happen pretty fast. And we're starting to see that already for what I would describe as the sort of more mundane kind of things that are happening in the background, right?
And I feel like in asking what the right mix of humans and AI is, we're kind of dancing around the real question that I think a lot of people have, which is, am I going to lose my job to this? Could the right mix one day just be 100% machine or 99% machine and 1% human? When you look far into the future and you think about the asset management industry in particular, I mean, could that be a reality one day?
I don't believe in 100%. I truly don't believe that AI will take over the world or threaten it. There is a component, and I think you've touched on this very often. It's about the judgment. Is it doing the right thing? And that's the piece we really have the least of a handle on, and I don't think we will ever fully have it. Studies have shown that AI is really terrible at acknowledging its own insecurities. How very human. But the point is you have very little feedback on how certain the system is about something. It will tell you a totally made-up story and be absolutely certain. As long as that's the case, and the big thinker in the AI space seem to believe that hallucinations are here to stay and nobody really knows how to fully get rid of them. As long as that's the case, and I can't judge the reliance, human judgment will be the ultimate gatekeeper for pretty much everything that matters. And I wish to believe that what we do matters.
Okay, so Claudia doesn't believe in 100%, which is very reassuring. Daniel, what do you believe?
I also don't believe in the 100%. I guess I'd just say, however, that you could get close to it depending on the circumstances, right? So will there be job loss on the back of that? Most definitely, right? And we've gone through this before, right? We used to have, you know, horse and buggy drivers and, you know, switchboard operators and data entry people. We don't have them anymore, right? I think that will continue to happen, right? And you see it already, right? I live in San Francisco. I take Waymo everywhere. There's nobody driving, right? It works pretty well. And I think that will continue to happen. I think the real question is, with those free resources, I think previous generations of technology advance seem to suggest that does get recycled into new ways of thinking about what the economy looks like, right? And so I do think people will lose their jobs, but I think humans will retain the ability to drive innovation on the judgment side. So I also don't buy the 100% thing.
And I feel like sometimes to sort of gut check myself when we have these doom and gloom conversations about AI, I go back and watch what people were saying about the internet like 30 years ago, and it's pretty shocking. So good perspective there. And now that we've got the doom and gloom question out of the way, I mean, in the last 5 minutes we have together, I'm curious, what excites you the most when you look 5, 10 years in the future and you think about how this could be disruptive in a good way? I mean, where do you see the most opportunity right now? I don't know who wants to start.
So maybe this is not the 5-year plan, but I have been trying to convince people that machine learning is a great thing. I remember being on an IBM stage 15 years ago saying, hey, data is the new thing. And that was like, we have been preaching that choir for a really, really long time. And my observation has been that what we currently see is AI, like LLMs and co and chatbots. It has raised the level of awareness of the potential, and now I see a lot of more traditional machine learning, predictive modeling, optimization sneak into so many industries that so far have been kind of careful to adopt, whether this is agriculture, education, or allocation of resources. So for me, the excitement is actually maybe less about what LLMs are going to do tomorrow. It's the fact that we've finally gotten over the hurdle to recognize maybe the last gen algorithms. And I think this is where investment really needs to pay attention, like what industries are finally getting to the point where we are seeing the older brothers coming to the forefront and really changing the way things are done.
So, I mean, to tie it back to the first question, it sounds like maybe this was a good rebrand then, made it more accessible to a broader audience than maybe machine learning was 20, 30 years ago.
I just hope that we don't mess it up again with inflated expectations. I mean, we had a couple of AI winters. Many people may not remember this, but I hope we don't walk away because right now we are being told, oh, it will kind of rule everything, and saying, well, it has its limitations. I think as long as we're clear-eyed about that, we can really take advantage of the momentum that we currently have.
Yeah, I guess I have a flavor of that in mind when I think about what's exciting about it, and that is that I think it's resulted, so far at least, we shall see, in a willingness from people that I suspect 5 years ago would have been not all that keen in learning about quant and teaching themselves whatever the tools are necessary to do good quant work, to actually get involved into something that actually has the flavor of doing systematic analytical work, right? We've hired interns over our careers many times, and the quant guy trying to convince the intern that they should think about taking more math classes and doing more matrix algebra. I'm generally not successful, right?
Yeah.
But I have found more recently that if you substitute some of that by the idea that some of these new tools don't seem as hard, at least as an entry point, right? They can get just as complicated, to be clear, but at least the entry point seems easier. And we've seen a pretty interesting increase in interest in doing systematic work on the back of all of this AI stuff. And I'm actually quite excited about it because I think that's sort of where the fun is at, right? Thinking about how do you think about in a disciplined, systematic way about all these things.
So it sounds like what you're saying, the interns are psyched to get involved in AI in some way.
Certainly they're more psyched about that than they are about matrix algebra.
That makes a lot of sense. And, I mean, it just feels like when we talk about AI, it's basically used in a synonymous way with chatbots right now. And again, that's how really the broader public interacts with AI. Certainly that's my biggest interface into AI. But should we be expanding our aperture here? Should we be thinking beyond chatbots when you think about actual applications into finance?
Definitely, I think the current ongoing multimodal word, and I think it's less, maybe you correct me in that, I think the generative part of AI is probably less relevant for finance. It's really much more about bringing information from images or photographs or text in any language you choose together on the same table as you're trying to get a 360 view on what's going on, either very narrowly with this particular company right now, or more broadly about the economy. So it's actually this in-between math stage where everything is just a big equation with billions of parameters. That's the fun for me. I don't care what comes out on the other end and the next word it's going to tell me, right? This is secondary for it. Getting people to get excited about that is hard. But that's kind of my take on where the finance is. It's not about what it says back. It's about what representation it can find that can include different languages and video or whatever else that then I can plug into a better way of understanding the world.
Yeah, I guess so you asked the question, I guess I hadn't been thinking of the chat piece at all during this conversation.
Well, that's good.
So the question took me a bit by surprise. No, I think of it as a modeling tool, right? So you have a giant amount of data that is unstructured. The ability to think about modeling its features in various ways is, to me, what's exciting. The fact that I can, quote, ask a question, I don't really care all that much. So whether you think about measuring things that otherwise are very fuzzy, right? What is the sentiment of this particular bit of text, right? How do I think about emerging themes? Can I detect emerging themes that people are talking about in text that I read? Can I think about measuring things like conviction levels or measuring potentially the ability to tell that somebody might be lying in a bit of text, right? These kinds of questions to me are significantly more interesting than can it respond to a question, right? And of course it comes together, right? It's the same technology that allows you to do the responding of a question thing, but I frankly don't think that's the interesting part of it at all.